All right. I mean, you got mom who's sick. You got dad who's in the military. You guys were basically destined to be entrepreneur. I mean, you clearly are resilient. You got the stomach for it.
We would go around to garage sales and we'd go to Walmart. We'd buy like secondhand lots of like, hundreds of pounds of Legos from kids who just like discarded them and, left them for resale. And then
welcome to the Hard Way podcast with Joe De Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Races. We're teaching you how to overcome your obstacles in your life the same way we teach our 10 million plus Spartans to overcome obstacles on the course, with insight from the smartest, most accomplished experts from every corner of the world. Get ready to elevate your life today.
Joe De Sena here, CEO and founder of Spartan and host of the Hard Way podcast. I got my buddy Jacob Peters here. Jacob, a son to a military lifer. Dad was in the military.
Yeah, 30 years.
30 years. Grew up in Maryland.
Absolutely, Annapolis.
I love getting into backstories. So let's start. Let's have the listeners learn where you came from. How you got this mindset before we get into where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Bit of an interesting upbringing. So I had a dad who was in the Army. Moved around quite a bit. Didn't really have one place that I called home. And then my mom was chronically sick. So unfortunately, she couldn't really work too much of her life or hold down a job because she was in bed 5-6 nights a week. And it was a really awful condition that the traditional medical system just is not very good or equipped at solving. It's called cluster headaches. I don't know if anyone's listening is familiar with it, but it's basically a rare form of migraine where the pain, on like the way you measure the pain level, is worse than childbirth. And she was getting these things like 4 or 5 times a week, which, apparently 100 years ago, before morphine became ubiquitous, people that had this condition would literally just commit suicide. So she was being seen by, what was supposed to be the best neurology team at Johns Hopkins University over in Baltimore, nearby where I grew up. And all they were doing was giving her morphine and Toradol. No understanding of what actually might be causing this pain. They would basically just give her the Band-Aid solution, right? Which is kind of how the medical industry works in a lot of ways. They treat, symptoms rather than underlying root problems. So she was knocked out 5-6 days a week, having to take these really intense painkillers. And I just get curious as a teenager. And this is sort of like what led me on my entrepreneurial journey and got me into the health space. But I just got curious and I started Googling, like, what are cluster headaches? How do they work? And like within a few hours, I'm stumbling down some Reddit threads and rabbit holes where people are just like biohacking themselves. This was like well before the Huberman era where, this stuff was a bit more mainstream. I mean, this was 15 years ago, back when I was a teenager, and people were like, ordering magnesium supplements from eBay and Amazon and like, hacking their homocysteine levels and like trying to like, modulate different ways that the blood vessels would stop dilating. So it was a whole sort of, experimental process that me and my brother ended up like, running on my mom to try and like affect her condition. And we made a lot of progress just by like changing the food she was eating, getting her on like a whole regimen of more like holistic natural supplements, and even doing things like removing different perfumes and stuff from her environment, which like are known to trigger blood vessels via, the smell and stuff. So it was really, really crazy how much impact we were able to make on her disease, and her doctors were effectively dumbfounded.
I'm intrigued by the outcome of that, but I'm also intrigued by you and your brother have parents that are tough as nails in the military, that are dealing with pain every single day. You're seeing that. So I would imagine, but you tell me, watching that, living through it, you're probably pretty resilient, you and your brother.
It's a muscle, and going through hard shit, like it fundamentally changes the lens through which you view the world. And it just makes, day-to-day stresses that much easier to deal with.
And, well, how tough is she? How tough is mom? Who's tougher, mom or dad?
Mom's probably tougher than all of us combined, times 10.
Because she had to be, right?
Yeah. It's really, really sad, like all my friends, like, I'd go over their houses. Their mom was really involved in their life. Like my mom did as much as she could, God bless her. But, it's tough when you have to spend over half your life in bed by no choice of your own.
And did you guys finally come up with a solution?
Yeah, we got her diet and her lifestyle changed. We're able to like decrease the severity quite a bit. And now, thankfully 15 years later, there's a few more drugs in the market that, do seem to actually have an impact on this condition. But the biggest thing has actually been menopause, because, as like the female hormones naturally change in their 40s and 50s, it affects various different biological processes. And like, there's some interplay between like the way estrogen, works in these blood vessels dilating in migraine conditions. So thankfully, like just naturally, she's been doing much better once she hit that age.
So you and your brother are watching her progressively get better, but still watching that happen. Dad's pushing you probably, I don't know anything, but probably pushing you. I don't know. Did he push you to go into the military?
He did. And you know what? The sad thing is, between me and my brother, we were both 0 for 2 on fulfilling his promise and his dream. So to get into one of the military academies, so my dad went to West Point, which is up in upstate New York. And I was going to go to the Naval Academy. My brother was going to go to West Point, and we thought we were going to be like an Army Navy family. And at the last second, both of us decided to rescind our applications because you have to go through this whole like rigmarole where you get a congressman to approve you. I mean, it was a whole thing. You had to pass like a PT fitness test, and like both of us, were Boy Scouts and played sports, so we had kind of all the right qualifications, decent grades. But man, we just at the last second decided like it is a big deal to like want to commit, the next like basically 10 years of your life, right, to the academy and then to the service. Like I had this problem where I was like getting seasick when I'd go boating with my friends in Annapolis. So I'm like, how am I going to survive 5 years, on like a naval, cruise liner? So like we just decided to, opt for a different life path. And ultimately now that we're both entrepreneurs, we've found ways to, I guess, like, serve humanity in a different way.
Well, just going down a rabbit hole for a second, my dream is to have every American boy and girl in that last year of high school or right after high school do at least 1 year in the military. But that option doesn't exist, to your point. It's such a huge commitment that it's hard for folks, even military families like yourself, right, to get your arms around that big of a commitment. So I'm actually working with the DoD to figure out how do we create something that gets kids excited and gets them through a rite of passage. But you and your brother had a right. I mean, you got mom who's sick. You got dad who's in the military. You guys were basically destined to be entrepreneurs. I mean, you clearly are resilient. You got the stomach for it. And running and owning a business, not to take anything away from the military, is like going to war.
In a lot of ways, yeah, like you're eating glass every day. And it's funny you say I got the stomach for it, because ironically, I actually don't have a stomach. So we can get into this in a bit. But one of like the crazier struggles I've been through is I actually lost half my intestines during a life-threatening health battle 2 years ago.
Wow. Do you want to tackle that one for? I mean, you just keep coming at us with these crazy stories. So,
yeah.
So all right. Well, wait. Before we get to that, so you go. What college did you go to? Where'd you go?
I went down south to Virginia, University of Virginia, UVA. So to connect the dots, side projects and side companies was growing up in high school. My brother and I actually started a online Lego reselling company. So we would go around to garage sales, and we'd go to Walmart. We buy like secondhand lots of like, hundreds of pounds of Legos from kids who just like discarded them and, left them for resale. And then we'd go to Walmart and buy like 30 of a set when it was like 50, 60% off. And then we would part out all the individual bricks from these big collections and these sets we would buy, and we'd sell them on the internet. And we had an online store that did close to like 6 figures, when we were teenagers, and we had no other choice because like, we didn't have that much, financial, runway to fall back on. So it was make or break. Like we had to find our own way. And that's how we got our start, building businesses beyond just like, biohacking my mom with different supplements. And then I ended up at university for a few years. That took me to Wall Street. So I ended up doing a year in the banking world at JP Morgan up in New York. And it was while doing that I discovered technology and software, and ended up starting what ultimately became like a big software business, and is what sort of put me on the path to where I am now. And in between, obviously the health struggles.
Before we get into Wall Street, because I did my decade on Wall Street. My boys now they've got a little online business. They're selling used wrestling gear, which makes no sense to you and I. It's dirty, it's smelly, but it works every day. Packages are going out of my house. I don't understand it.
Well, my brother and I used to wrestle, ironically, so we do understand it. And we would buy like OG used shoes from people on eBay. Like it's a thing. Like the wrestling shoe space is it's a whole secret market. It's a secret economy.
I'm going to get you on the phone with my boys, if you don't mind. We're going to do that at some point in the next few days, if you got time for it. Give them some tips.
Yeah.
So, all right. So
let's make it happen.
You do a year on Wall Street. You stumble upon an opportunity in software.
Yes. Yep. So, well, I was already working crazy hours, but I decided to make my life even crazier for God knows what reason. But so I started spending the few nights and weekends that I did have working with a friend who I'd met hacking on some software concepts. So he had like sold a company before. He was like, a bit more of an experienced entrepreneur than me. I was learning a ton from him. And we just decided that we wanted to build something. We didn't know what it was. And it was, a long, like grueling 9 months of hacking things together. And eventually we discovered a problem that big companies were willing to pay for.
Well, don't leave me hanging. What was it?
Basically, the area of the bank that I was working on was more on like the AI and data science side. So, I was doing some like heavy quant trading, and I ended up getting together with a few AI and data interested people from JP. We've paired up with like a few people from like McKinsey, Deloitte, Microsoft, and we were all getting together like on weeknights, sort of just like learning about the frontier of the industry. I mean, this was back in like 2016, when before large language models, before Chat GPT, like, it was a different era effectively. And one of the places that we would convene sometimes on weeknights was Microsoft. And Microsoft, they had this like free open co-working meeting space in Times Square in New York that they would host us at. And I just got talking to some of the employees that were working there and like was asking, why do they give this free office space? And they were talking about like, oh, it's because they want to build community around their product. They want to get like engineers and smart technical people to like be building on their ecosystems and eventually build companies. And then those companies become customers. And it was like an entire marketing funnel and flow. So then I sort of take those insights and marry it with like the things that I was hacking on with this other friend who was more of like a software guy. And we realized like, wow, there's actually an opportunity to like solve that problem for companies like Microsoft, because they have just like no concept as to what the return on investment is for, all these community events and like this community budget. So like, Microsoft, AWS, these companies are spending like, like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollars a year on like developer and engineer marketing, and just had like no concept of like how, that community spend was translating back to like the bottom line of their business or bringing in sales. It was just like a giant blind spot for them. So we basically got the idea to build software around this pain point. And I mean, that this is sort of the high level backstory, but it really ended up taking on a life of its own. We raised $70 million of outside venture capital dollars for that business. It's now a very large, like multi-$100 million company. I've since moved on from the startup, but was very instrumental in the early days of getting it from 0 to 1, and kind of got to retire, so to speak, at 25.
I love it. I love it. And your brother was not with you. What was your brother doing?
Yeah, no, my brother was actually working on a company of his own. So he's still building that business. It's more in the financial services space. So he's kind of carved his own path. But I mean, we're best friends. We talk every day. I'm his biggest advocate, and he's mine. So it's special being in the same business, as your next of kin.
I'm 54 now. I worked on Wall Street for over a decade. I've started businesses since I'm 13. And in all those people that I've met, all those businesses, all those handshakes, there's very few in their late teens, early 20s that build a business like you built. You know what I mean? It's pretty rare. Most people go to college, get a job. What do you think that was? Was that the Lego?
Yeah, it's probably all the things. Like it's so hard to hindsight's 2020. It's so hard to connect the dots looking backwards. But yeah, I'd say it's probably a few things. One, like, the beautiful thing about Legos is it's a certain way to like train your brain, right? Like you look at a giant pile of like hundreds or thousands of bricks, and then you kind of know in your brain like what you want the final creation to be, and like they can get connected in like an infinite number of ways, right? To build something really big and impressive. And I kind of almost view business the same way, right? Like our markets, like I sort of see, there's just like a million little problems or pieces or components, that exist out there. And you just have to have a very clarified end vision, and you can stitch things together in like a pretty remarkable way to build something big and unique. And it's just how I look at the world, man. Like I kind of see the world as like, just like one giant pile of Lego bricks. Like, I can bring that designer in to help us build that. I can do a marketing campaign in this way. Like, oh, we can, hire that person to do this. Like we can, build this product feature and put this button here. And like, you all of a sudden you make like 5,000 of those little micro decisions. It's called like, each decision being the analogy for Lego block. And then you start to have this creation and like a constellation of bricks, and they all fit together in a unique way, and that's a business, right? Um, and yeah, so I think there is probably something there as far as, the pattern recognition ability that I honed just from being like stupidly obsessed with Lego blocks, and how that, translated into business building. But even beyond that, like it's definitely all the family stuff, man. Like, when you are forced to fend for yourself, like your parents can't go on take you on vacations like all your friends can, like, I'm not saying, I grew up in a trailer park and we were dirt broke. Like, I don't want to, make it seem like this is some crazy rags to riches story, but like, generally we were like, probably like lower middle class in America. It's not like I was waiting to see where my next meal is going to come from. Like, but I mean, the military does take care of you to some degree, but like, it was still hard, man. Like we kind of had to raise ourselves and become like very self-sufficient. And seeing your mom like in bed for most of your life from a young age, like it just forces you to grow up at like a much more accelerated pace. Like I'm only 28 now, and people think I'm like 35. Just as far as like maturity level goes.
I know I would agree with that. I heard something recently that most people that do something great later in life, we look back and we look at their childhood, there was some trauma, there was something, and I guess, tell me what you think, but I guess if we had a whole farm full of plants, and most of them grew in the greenhouse and had no trauma, but others grew outside and had windstorms and hail that they had to, like, those plants outside that dealt with the quote unquote trauma would probably be more likely to survive.
Resiliency is learned,
Tell me about the health scare, because it's, people are listening and they're like, oh, this guy has had it easy, made a couple of $100 million, went to JP Morgan. What happened with your health?
Well, it all started with the COVID vaccine, believe it or not. So it's March of 2021. I get the shot, and instantly I knew something was wrong.
Oh.
I don't drink coffee, and it felt like I had drank like 6 cups. I mean, my heart was ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. And I told the the nurse who like did the shot, and they're like, "Do you have any symptoms?" I'm like, "Yes, something's definitely wrong. I don't feel very good." And I kind of knew that instantly something was wrong. And they're like, "No, this is normal. You're fine." And I was like, "Okay, I guess you're right." But later that night, it just kept getting worse, and I had like just a sixth sense that something was really wrong. Fast forward 2 days later, the symptoms haven't gone away. I'm like having all this like heart pain, and I never felt anything like that before. So it was very like foreign feeling. And I'm in the kitchen with the girl I was seeing at the time, and I just like collapse in her arms. Like I totally faint. I've never done that before in my life. Like I didn't even realize like fainting was a thing, like, and next thing I know, it all gets super hazy. The paramedics are coming, the EMS, and they put me on a stretcher. They hook me up to an EKG. They're telling me like I'm having a heart attack. I'm like, what the heck? The whole thing was pretty surreal. And they kept asking me how old I was. And I'm like, 26 years old, 26 years old. They're like, what's your birthday? And I tell them like 8 times. And they were so like flabbergasted that I was so young, and having like, well, on the spot, what, to them based on the EKG looked like a heart attack, that they didn't believe me. They thought I was just like, confused or dehydrated or something. And like, that I was really 46. But I was like, no, I'm 26 years old, sir. Like, here's my ID. And, they were just like, we never see anything like this. So I get to the hospital, and after being there, for the whole night, they basically formally diagnosed me with myocarditis, which is like an autoimmune condition where your immune system effectively attacks, like the muscles of your heart, and it causes like a really big inflammation storm in your body. And that lasted for a few weeks. So I did not get discharged from the hospital for a few weeks dealing with like this heart inflammation. And now the studies are coming out that show young men age 15 to 35 are, I'll send the papers, in the show notes if anyone's curious. Like, this is not, some anti-vax conspiracy stuff. Like, this is genuine, hard, cold science. If you're aged 15 to 35, you are more likely to have complications with heart trauma as a byproduct of the vaccine than if like you were unvaccinated and like got COVID. Like, it's actually like net more dangerous, for certain people to get this vaccine. And I, being like a very like much like, empowered citizen scientist, I decided to dig into like why this might have happened. And come to find out, there was a few issues. One, Pfizer and Moderna, they rushed the vaccine delivery. very much so that like the quality control was pretty horrible in the early batches. So I was like probably, one of like the first like 5-10% of Americans in the US to get vaccinated. Like I was lucky, lucky. Just because where I was in LA at the time, like they had openings. But because like they rushed it to market, apparently a lot of people got like 1000x the dose of mRNA, and like others probably just got saline because like for whatever reason the way that the vaccine was like created in these vats, like they basically didn't distribute it evenly into the vials when they ended up like bringing it to the distribution sites. So who knows? I could have gotten like a much higher dose of mRNA that just like put my body into like a complete like autoimmune shock.
Wow.
The second is like if you look at the studies from the human trials, they actually knew that like 0.001% of men in the trials were getting carditis and like heart related symptoms. Like they had the data, but this is sort of like the fatal flaw in their calculus is that if you're going to give the vaccine to 2 billion people and like it's 0.001% of people, all of a sudden that's like 20 million men that are going to potentially, that becomes a very material population. Normally most drugs when they go through human trial, like they are going to be distributed to like a population of like a few 100,000, a few million people max, 10, 20, not billions, not billions. So like the math starts to break when you see like statistical anomalies with symptoms and like, side effects and stuff. So it's like they knew the whole time. And they knew there were quality control issues. They rushed the vaccine out, and it was a total nightmare. So that's where my health.
What do the numbers look like? How many 15 to 35-year-olds had this issue?
I'll have to pull up the studies after the fact, but it's material. And the third thing that's really crazy about all of this is allegedly there are like very strict reporting requirements for what can be even considered in those statistics. So in my case, believe it or not, the way that the doctors at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, which is where I was being treated, wrote my intake was they put myocarditis of unknown origin. Mm-hmm. So the data that's coming out now that's showing, there's a certain population of men that are getting carditis. That is only if the doctor, writes in the hospital, writes that it was vaccine related. Mine was not. So imagine how many others are just not even part of the statistics. So it might, unfortunately be way worse than we even know. And it's really sad and sickening. And that was, ultimately like the catalyst for, what almost killed me. So I'm in the hospital for a few weeks with carditis. And then because they can't get this inflammation storm under control with my heart, it ends up leading to a sudden onset diagnosis of a different autoimmune disease called Crohn's. So I'd never had, Crohn's disease or autoimmune. I'd never even heard of this stuff, until that day in the hospital where I start shitting blood. I'm like, nurse, something's wrong. Like this doesn't seem normal. And they end up doing like a colonoscopy, and they're like, you now have Crohn's disease. I'm like, what the heck is that? And it turns out, when your immune system is just like so overloaded and dealing with like, an issue like carditis, sometimes things just break and it becomes like the perfect storm, moment for the mirror to shatter, so to speak. And that's what happened to me. So the heart inflammation led to, the inflammation basically spreading to my colon, and my body just couldn't handle it. So I got diagnosed with sudden onset Crohn's disease, a second autoimmune condition. It gets worse though. I'm in the hospital dealing with the heart inflammation still, and now the newly diagnosed, colon inflammation in my stomach. They're like, okay, we want to do like a biopsy of some parts of your colon. So they put me under to do like, the biopsy needle in my stomach. And during the procedure, they accidentally puncture my left lung. And I didn't know it until I woke up. So I wake up from the surgery, my heart hurts, my stomach hurts, and now my lung hurts. And I'm like, nurse, something's like really wrong with my chest. And they're like, you're probably fine. It takes them like 14 hours to get a chest x-ray because the hospital was just like so backed up with COVID. And they finally do a chest x-ray on me, and my lung is literally the size of a golf ball. Like it had shriveled up because they accidentally punctured it, with the biopsy needle. So now I'm ailing from 3 major organs, and it's been like over a month in the hospital at this point. And they have to put me on like a chest tube to reinflate my lung. It felt like I was a polio patient, with this big tube around me, helping me reflate and like keep my lung inflated while it naturally healed. So it was just like a nightmare of a health situation. And it culminated in them having to remove half my intestines. So they couldn't get the inflammation under control, and my colon swelled up to 2 times the normal size. It's called toxic megacolon. It's basically when like the organ just like doesn't know what to do. So it goes haywire, and it's like, fuck, like we can't deal with this much information, so we're going to explode. Like that's basically, what was about to happen. So I was, very near like impending death of organ failure from organ failure. And they're like, the only saving grace is we can like take out your colon. So, now I'm like basically down a major organ, and they finally like are able to get my health under control with like a few other, biologic pharmaceuticals, which like also tamp your immune system down to control inflammation. And that's the state that the hospital system left me. And it was all catalyzed by the COVID vaccine.
Sorry about all that. I mean, that's a terrible, terrible story, but you're alive now. You feeling okay?
I'm feeling okay. And it's only thanks to some really amazing doctors that I had to go out and discover on my own, that the traditional system wants nothing to do with, and that my my insurance would not cover. So I ended up posting about my story on Twitter. It went a little bit viral, and thankfully I got connected to a whole host of really high-end concierge physicians, where these folks are practicing what I consider real medicine. So they like have access to the frontier of tests. They look at your whole body holistically. They try to understand like the state of your nervous system. Are you kind of chronically in fight or flight? What does your HRV rate look like? How are you sleeping? What are you eating? What do your nutrient stores look like? What are your antioxidant levels? Do you have any like genetic SNPs that might put you at risk for various diseases, or impede your ability to like absorb certain nutrients like MTHFR, which affects your B vitamin store, like all these things. It was like a whole nother world. It was basically what I was doing with my mom, but times 100, and in like a real medical MD driven context. And that's the only reason I'm sitting here talking to you today, and continuing to build companies, and like wanting to fix the healthcare system, is because like I've seen what the frontier looks like. I've seen like a whole new world of healthcare, but it's not evenly distributed, and it's not accessible to most people, and like most people don't even know about it. So imagine if we could take this elite level of high end care that only folks like myself, who were blessed, and had like a few $100,000 out of pocket to pay for it, and like had the right connections to be able to get the warm introductions to these physicians and get off their multi-year long wait lists. Like, what if everyone had access to that? Like, the chronic disease would basically not exist.
I was lucky. My mother found yoga, health food meditation, became a vegan in the 1970s. Her mom was sick with cancer. So I got introduced to a lot of this outside thinking, open-mindedness. But most 99.9% of the people don't. Like, you found it, but most folks just blindly walk into any hospital. And now the reality is hospitals do a lot of good.
Yeah.
They didn't do so good. They didn't do so good with you. But the idea of supplemental care with some real pros. So is that the business you're in now?
In a sense, yeah. So here's the reality. Technology is making people more empowered in every way, right? It's sort of the inevitable arc of technology. It takes what was once only available for the few and democratizes it to the many. Indoor plumbing in the 1800s, only like the richest of the rich in America had access to that, right? Like clean running water in their homes. Now it's effectively everywhere, right? Because utility companies decided, hey, like we can actually make a business out of productizing this for everybody. Uber, black cars used to only be, accessible. Now everyone has on their smartphone, like, the ability to call private driver, like personal computers. Man, companies in the 50s, they like, were the only ones that could afford these massive mainframes that like took up entire rooms. Like now, we're having this, conversation on like a laptop, and it's happening in health, and like this, high end world of concierge health is kind of the next domino to fall. So, effectively what we're doing is we're taking, what like these elite practitioners do, and we're building a lot of it as code so that everybody can have, access to some of the same features. So we have a marketplace that we've built that takes like a lot of like the most scientifically robust and vetted products and tests and things that like really only these high-end doctors generally know about or have access to, and make it easy for you to access, click of a button, order it, to your house, just like ordering DoorDash. Our nurses come straight to you. And then the second thing is this idea of health sovereignty for your health data, right? Like today, if you wanted to know like what the status of your health is, like it's trapped in like a bunch of PDFs from LabCorp and Quest, and like, or it's, in some janky hospital system, portal that like you'll never, why does everyone not have their health data, on their smartphone like they do their Instagram account. Like it just doesn't exist. So like that's the second big component of what we're trying to build, is like make people health sovereign, right? Like it's crazy that you can be your own bank and have a Bitcoin wallet on the blockchain, but like you can't be, your own steward of your health data. Like it just doesn't exist. So that's really what we're trying to do, is like, democratize access to a lot of this, higher end world of concierge integrative care, and also make people health sovereigns, so that they can have all their health data in one place on their smartphones, see how their biomarker levels are trending and tracking and changing over time, which like no practitioners or a lot of traditional hospitals are easily able to do.
And what are the obstacles to getting this done?
Well, it's a hard technology problem. So that's that's one of the biggest blockers. The other thing is like, we haven't really seen any healthcare companies build large, respected consumer brands in a lot of ways, right? Like take One Medical. No one's walking around wearing a One Medical t-shirt, like they might have, a decently big footprint, but like no one really has like deep consumer affinity. Now contrast that to something like Alo Yoga. Every company wants to do a brand collaboration with them. They are like, everywhere in popular culture. It's cool, to be like associated with that brand. Like, can we create a similar type of social movement in the healthcare space? Like, perhaps. And that's like part of the inspiration behind my new company name, which again, we're still in private beta. We have not publicly launched too hard yet, but you can find us after the show. It's at superpower.com, and that's the idea behind the name. Is we want to build, what we think can be like a really, really big lifestyle brand in this health space that stands for what it sounds like, which is superpowering people's health. Like what's your superpower? It's like, we think of things like Iron Man and, these like big, strong heroes that are supposed to save us. But like the reality is, we need to save ourselves from poor health, and like being the best, like most superpowered version of yourself is, is ultimately what I think is going to make a long, fulfilling life.
While you're building out Superpower, have you come across, and going through your own health journey, have you come across 3 things everybody should do every day to maximize their health and wellness?
Something I've recently started doing, which has been like a massive improvement for my health, is 45 minutes before bed, I don't look at my phone. And I don't just like put it on my nightstand. I actually put it in another room. And that way I'm not tempted. And when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to look at it first thing. Like I used to be stuck in the loop where like I'd be scrolling up until 5 minutes before I go to bed. And then I wake up and I start scrolling. And like, one, it disrupts your sleep. There's so many studies to prove it. 2, like you just get like bombarded with this massive, juice of hit of dopamine in the first thing in the morning. It really screws up your ability, I think, to focus, and to get dialed in and kick off your day right. So like that's been one of the biggest things, number one, that I think. The second is a practice of gratitude. So, I like to think of myself as like a pretty, scientifically rigorous person. And I don't know, how many studies there are for this, but I will say for me personally, N of 1 study, like this shit works. Every morning I wake up and I just try to like, thank my family, thank my friends, thank God, just really, really deeply, like, imbue like a sense of gratitude. Like life is just so amazing. And like after you've been through some hard stuff, when it comes to growing up, or like after you've been sitting on your deathbed, like it just changes the lens through which you view the world and reality. And like, it makes you really, truly grateful. Like I actually don't think you can fully appreciate life as much if you haven't like been faced with your own mortality. So I really try to like just adopt a hugely grateful mindset every single morning. And the third, that's been like really, really impactful is I stopped eating out at restaurants. Like I generally eat pretty healthy, but even when I go to restaurants and I think I'm eating healthy, getting a steak, you don't know if it's cooked in canola oil, like it's probably not grass-fed beef. Like if you're not eating meat that's fed by grass, it's probably grain-fed, which means the polyunsaturated fatty acid content's gonna be way too high, and it's gonna translate into like your cells. Like we are what we eat, and like no one thinks about this stuff. The pans they use at the restaurants are probably cooked, scratched. Teflon gets into your food. The heavy metals leach in. They don't use organic vegetables or fruits because they're trying to save money. So you're just ingesting a ton of glyphosate. We do a ton of tests at Superpower, to help you measure like the levels of environmental toxins and stuff, and like me, who's a pretty healthy person, I realized that like my levels of BPA and glyphosate and all these like horrible pesticides and plastics were way too high. And I'm like, this is crazy because I'm so diligent about what I put in my body. Like, where is it coming from? And I realized it's probably the fact that I eat out like 3-4 times a week. And even when I think I'm eating healthy, you don't realize what's going on in the kitchen behind the scenes. Like I've just completely gone, started eating at home, started cooking, and just becoming more self-sufficient. Yes, it takes a little more time, but like I like the level of control, and I ultimately feel better. So those are the 3 things, just being hyper diligent about phone, not eating at restaurants, and like, ultimately just trying to be like as grateful as possible, because like life is amazing.
I love it. How do people find you?
Find me on superpower.com or on Twitter, twitter.com/J__Cub, Jacob.
How's dad feel that you didn't go in the military and you're doing all this?
I hope he's pretty proud. Maybe we'll phone him in next time and ask him.
All right, you're awesome. Thanks for doing this. We got to get you to a race and introduce Superpower to a bunch of the customers.
Yes, Joe, I'd love that. It'd be epic.